Welcome back to Hello, my name is Jenna. I could not be more excited to have a new guest on. Graham Skidmore is here with me today to discuss, well, a lot that I'm absolutely fascinated with. But to sum it up for you before we dive in, he has a lot to say about some of the corrupt systems that I share with you. As you know, I talk a lot about how we need to rebuild. And so I found that he had some really valuable insights about where that comes from and how connecting to our higher selves, our intuition, the earth, the animals, and just the process of stewardship in general can help with some of these things. And so I am really, really honored to welcome him today. So, Graham, officially welcome to Hello, my name is Jenna.
Well, hello, my name is Jenna. Hello, my name is Graham. And I
I,
really appreciate you having me and in the kind introduction and even the kindness that, before we got started here, of your support of checking out some of the content that I've shared and that means a lot to me. It's like, right? It's always nice to be seen or heard. And so I appreciate you seeing or hearing me.
yes, I absolutely agree. Being seen, heard, witnessed, all of that, it can be very powerful. So, thank you. To start, I wanted to ask you, where did you come from, like in terms of just kind of your life path that brought you to some of the theories and suggestions
Yeah.
that you bring online? So could you tell us kind of where you were and what brought you to where you're at today and some of the things we're going to talk about?
For sure. And I think that's such and by the way, I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think we're going to go into some places and some topics that I probably haven't on some other podcasts. And so that's exciting to me.
Yeah.
And I also think that, this is also one of the points I'm always trying to make with people is that, we're kind of conditioned to think, hey, we're born into however we're born and we are what we are. And yeah, we can, smooth the edges, do a little this or that, but essentially we are what we are. And my experience has been that's just the furthest thing from the truth. And I guess that being said, I'll share with you, like you said, where I kind of came from and how I got to where I'm at, because it's absolutely different than how I started. So, I grew up just understanding myself as a quote unquote normal person, albeit, quirky or socially awkward or whatever else. But essentially, hey, you know, you're normal, you're a guy, you go to work, you get a job, you provide for a family, right? You earn money and you're supposed to check these boxes of life that say I did these things, and then you're supposed to be happy and stuff's supposed to work out. Well, the problem is I checked all kinds of the boxes. I did all those things. I excelled in all of those areas. And I was very far from happy. The height of my success was the height of my misery and my unfulfillment. And so I ended up leaving a corporate career that I never thought that I would leave after 21 years. And, you know, when I left, I said, all right, look, I don't even know who I am anymore. I just feel like an accumulation of learned behaviors and habits to get by, et cetera. And I can't go on to this next chapter of my life, whatever that may be, until I figure out, how to feel better, both physically, mentally, emotionally, you know. And so I said, all right, well, again, I understood everything through a Western lens. And so then it led me down the path of Western healing, which was, okay, well, I said, I went to the doctors. And I'm like, all right, so, tell me some things that, how do I get better? Right. I did air quotes for those that are listening.
Mhm.
And they were like, well, look, here's some diagnoses for you. You're autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyscalculia, alexithymia, and then these glasses are Erland syndrome. And I was like, all right, okay, that's enough for me. I don't need any more anything else, right? And I have no doubt that more would have come had I kept the door open to that, just based on how I've come to understand the parallel between spiritual giftedness and neurodiversity. And so I said, all right, so and it was helpful for me because at that time it gave me a new vernacular. It allowed me to place emotions and feelings and words to what I had experienced that I could struggle with before, right? But also then what I found was the more that I kind of leaned into these identities and labels, also then the more that I leaned into those symptoms and the limited limitations that can come from those, which then led me down another path of feeling bad all over again. And so I said, well, this is terrible, right?
Mhm.
I played the game of life according
Yeah.
to the way I was taught, and I checked all the boxes, and I felt horrible. Then I went
Mhm.
and said, okay, Western medicine, I learned myself the way that I'm supposed to, according to you guys, and now I feel horrible again. And I still got like a lot of life left, and I'm not really into feeling horrible for the remainder of this. So now
Mhm.
what? And so that led me down another path of understanding myself through through an Eastern, indigenous, and spiritual lens. And what I mean by that is really understanding myself as having an energetic body, understanding energy, understanding how emotions are tied to organs, understanding how that feeds into us, the power of breath work, the importance of stewardship, the importance of connectivity, of with ourselves and our surroundings, the importance of having a symbiotic relationship with ourselves and our surroundings as opposed to the parasitic, that is predominantly out there, and as well as understanding. I'll just call it having more than five senses and understanding the game of life differently as a living and learning environment as a classroom. And one of your guests, you had just had Sunshine, the pink-haired sober witch. It's
Mhm.
very, very close to me. She was like, and I worked with her in the corporate life. She was like, hey, you're like actually really like psychic and gifted and stuff like that, right? And I was like, nah, what are you talking about? Because, I understood things and thought about those things as very uh, sensationalized or sci-fi comics,
Mhm.
things of that nature. And so it wasn't something that was relatable to me. And so, she helped me to definitely start to understand and open up that side of myself. And it was only once I integrated, the Western learnings, Eastern, indigenous, and spiritual, and through I guess, an integrated approach, as well as recognizing that I'm an individual with my own individualized physiology that I created for myself based on the living and learning experience that I needed to have, that I started to heal and become healthy and become happy, and a lot of ailments, illnesses, etc., went away accordingly. And so from there, along the way, as I continue to peel away those layers of guilt, shame, fear, trauma, conditioning that prevented me from recognizing and remembering who I was, as those peeled away, new gifts, abilities, wisdom, understanding presented themselves to me. And so, and so when I say that, who I am today looks nothing like who I was before, and the ability that I have today to understand and comprehend things is nothing like I was before. But that was part of my journey, is I had to go through what I had to go through to be able to understand, what I needed to understand for this next chapter of life. And so, you know, what I want, I don't view anything that I've gone through as mistakes or avoidable. They were all things that were happening to me by design, catalysts that I needed to have so that I could do what I needed to do later on in life. So anyway, I probably gave you a little bit of a longer answer than what you were looking for, but that's, um, but yeah, so anyway, so that's kind of how I got to this place. And so after spending the last 8 years where my job has been understanding in myself and working on myself and healing myself, I'm now starting to, step back out into the world, and talking about my next chapter of life and my purpose and what I feel called to do.
Yeah, and I love long answers, by the way, so please give me as many as you would like. But I did want to, before we jump into the next thing, touch on what you said about Sunshine just telling you that you were psychic, pointing out that you
Yeah.
had some of those gifts, because I had a very similar journey where I was seeing a psychic. I had never seen one before, through my friend. And, she did the reading, but at the end she goes, you're quite psychic. You're like me. You you know that, right? And I said, no. I had no idea. And kind of like you, that was the beginning of a journey of exploring that. And it coincided with her telling me, because for me, uh, my career has really held me back. Maybe you can relate with some of the things you went through. I also can relate to you with the checkbox life. And that's one of the things. I'm so glad you brought that up, because when I read that and some things you had written, I said, "Oh, good. He can help me with this," because I talk to my listeners about that all the time, about that pressure of the checkbox life and how it's just really debilitating, and how when you do that and you succeed at it, quote unquote, for people on audio, you really just sometimes are miserable on the inside, or you're not where you thought you would be. And for me, that led me to a path of self-destruction, because it was like, okay, I did the thing, and I was always a little bit of like both a rule follower and a rebel. And so it was like I did what I was supposed to do, and it's a mess. And then I got mad and started doing self-destructive things, because it's like, hey, I followed the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. Why why is this the result? And so, there's different steps that lead us to different places, but meeting with that psychic and her just witnessing me in that way really opened some doors to just a beautiful and new cycle of growth that I never imagined possible. And so I want to point that out because this idea of witnessing and speaking to people's souls is something I really want to encourage my listeners to do, to not underestimate their power, even with one sentence, to set someone on a restorative path. So I'm so glad that you brought that up about sunshine. Thank you. Um, and then kind of just leading into the next part of the path. So kind of once you went on this journey of, exploring your gifts, your healing, your intuition, collective needs, you know, there was this process of clearing some of the conditioning. So then what happened next and how does it relate to just kind of who we are as humanity and what we're really here to do and to learn?
Okay, well, let me try to see. I want to try to avoid going on a rabbit hole here, right? But maybe we do. Let's find out.
Hmm.
So one of the other things then that Sunshine said to me, or she says, "Hey, look, I'm not necessarily encouraging you to do this. I'm just passing through a message." And then she said, "The message I'm passing through to you is that you would benefit from doing like a mushroom journey." Now,
Hmm.
you know, at this point in my life, drugs legal weren't really a part of my thing. I was a boozer because, in hindsight, I recognize it was because boozing, numbed all of my sensitivity and everything like
Hmm.
that. And so that was so that's what I was unconsciously doing, whatever. So anyway, but when she said that to me, for whatever reason, I just had this feeling of there's a lot of responsibility behind that door. And so don't open it until you're ready to accept it. And so it took me about 6 months
Hmm.
between the time that was suggestion was made to me and the time that I actually did it. And so when I did that, you know, um, that definitely then opened up. And because, by the way, I should clarify too, I wasn't religious. I wasn't spiritual. I wasn't even curious about that kind of stuff, quite frankly,
Hmm.
throughout my life. And so all of a sudden going through that, you know, what I experienced for myself was the best way I could describe it. That first time was like just like my mind opening up and like a bridge is going out, and all of a sudden like an expand, like I just felt like the mind expanding. And then all of a sudden new information just kind of, I don't know how to say it, but I just knew new things
Hmm.
and felt guided in ways that I hadn't felt guided before. And so one of the things that I had to do was I had to relearn the way that I had to relearn how my body talked to me. Right. And so I had to replace aches and pains with um information and guidance, and recognizing that become aches and pains when they get ignored. And so I went through, and then I also, went through some time with the Thoth Tarot deck and doing a lot of shadow work.
Hmm.
And so, you know, then as I started going through that, then also it's, the knowledge of my connectivity with my surroundings and how my surroundings talked to me and how my surroundings guided me. I would ask questions and then I'd have to pay attention to see how the answers came to me, and it wasn't always all at once. It'd be little bits and pieces here and there, and then I have to kind of put the puzzle together. And so, I spent quite a bit of time to learn, how my body talked to me, what it meant when it did different things, recognizing them as information, and then recognizing as well how my surroundings talk to me to guide me. And then all of a sudden it became pretty cool. Like, hey, wow, like I'm like interacting with my environment. My environment is interacting with me. And wait a second here. I actually haven't been getting the quote unquote screw job from life. It hasn't been life happening to me. It's been life happening for me and to help me and to guide me. I just didn't know how to understand it because I wasn't taught how to do that.
Hmm.
And so once I started to recognize, how all of these things were happening for me to guide me, all of a sudden there's a kind of a cool factor that there was, but there was also a reassurance, a safety, right? This feeling of not being alone, this feeling of not necessarily needing to be dependent on things because there was something larger than me that was helping me and guiding me. And and again, I've still had a very, logical and analytical mind. So I would keep track and I would just kind of call it God time versus Graham time. Right. And I got to tell you, 8 or 9 years later, when things happen on quote unquote God time versus Graham time, I have yet to win. it has yet to turn out better when it would, if I would have gotten what I wanted in the timeline that I
Mhm.
wanted it to versus
Mhm.
how it actually unfolded. And so, so paying attention to that, helped me to get my buy-in, right? While I was still working through my faith and my belief and that kind of trust, I needed those synchronicities as a kind of a feedback loop to reinforce, to help me move, to help me change my belief system, frankly, right? Because it wasn't something that I grew up with. It wasn't something that was inherent to me. So I really had to do a lot of rewiring.
Mhm. I can relate to that too. I I like to create a lot of things and I like to just kind of arrive. That's probably something we're conditioned to do too. And it's like, okay, I make one thing and I'm ready to do the next thing. So I too sometimes struggle with timelines with getting, to the next step. So I can relate to that a lot. And, I appreciate what you shared just kind of about opening your mind to all of this. And, you know, I wanted to ask you specifically, so I'm a big believer in astrology, and I noticed in one of your videos you mentioned, sometimes the question that's not asked is, what is Earth for? Where does that fall in
Ooh,
the mix? And you talked about uh, what we're here for and what we're here to learn. And so, could you say more about that?
yeah, I'm excited. So you actually you watched some of the I Didn't Come with an Owner's Manual video series.
I sure did.
Oh,
I
beautiful. I
sure
love that.
did.
That's awesome. I love it. I
Yep.
love it. I love it.
Hmm.
So, yes, and so right, so in astrology, right, we're familiar with different planets have got their different energies, their different learnings, their different catalysts and things like that associated with them. But the thing, right, to your point, what we don't talk about those, what does Earth, and what does Earth stand for? And so the purpose of Earth is maintaining love through adversity, right? And the reason why that's needed is because we're meant to be powerful people. We're meant to be creators. But if we're going to be given the ability to create, we also need to have some self-governance, right? And so we need to, and so if we're going to be given power, we need to make sure that we're going to use it for the greatest and highest good of all. And so, one of the ways of learning how to do that, though, is you have to go through a trial and error. You have to be able to for lack of a better description, misuse it to recognize why that's not, so that you make the choice to say, that's not how I want to use my power. This is how I want to use my power. And so, how do we go through that learning process? And so, I describe that learning process is it's, we, the overall end theme is maintaining love through adversity. And we do that through the understanding of divine love while having the courage to do what is right while gaining the wisdom to operate in the highest good of all
Hmm.
through stewardship. And so everything involved in Earth's curriculum is about helping people to understand that. Now that is that's this concept of Earth as a living and learning environment isn't anything new, right? There's plenty of places that talk about that. However, we're not all here to learn the same things. We're not all here to learn the same way. And a lot of this knowledge has been suppressed, taken away, et cetera, because it's also about personal empowerment. And the hierarchical structures, both in the status quo and in spiritual communities and religions, et cetera, right, are all, have replaced the power of the person with the power of the structure, with the power of the system, the power of the hierarchy.
Yes.
And yes, and so so unfortunately, a lot of this knowledge, has been lost, and it's been, given to me to reshare.
Well, I want to first say thank you because, you know, kind of what you shared, because I saw it either in another one of your videos or I read about it, but when you talk about people are here to learn different things, that actually struck a personal chord with me because I can be vulnerable and share that I can be a really judgmental person. I've been given the gift of vision, especially when it comes to seeing shadows and corruption. And sometimes when people don't see it, I can be very judgmental of that, like how did you not know, or how did you not see? And so when you said people are here to learn different things, it's like, okay, so they were meant to maybe have a different relationship with that situation than me. And I'm still working on this because I think it's going to be a lifelong thing that I struggle with judgment and developing a healthy relationship with it because I think we need judgment sometimes when it comes to morality and things like that. But I definitely need to kind of shift that lens to a more compassionate, empathetic one. So I just wanted to share that there's so many, personal journeys and internal struggles that we all have with so many different things because we are layered divine beings. There's many things we're capable of, but there's also many things that can bring us down, especially with what we remember, what we inherit, and what we try to survive or versus where we try to grow. And so we carry a lot with us that we're working on all the time. And so your content really helped me with just some personal things as I watched and read it. So I do want to encourage my listeners and viewers to check out, your series and your articles because it really does help. And I'll link all of that in my show notes so they can reach it. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
Um,
Do you mind if
I
I jump in
also,
before you
yeah,
go on your next question? Cool,
yeah.
because you touch on some really important stuff, and this has been
Mhm,
thing. And these are like a lot of things, right? There's so many half truths out there, right? It's not so much that the information is inaccurate as much as it is incomplete. And that difference of being by it being incomplete is the difference between the empowerment to the person versus the empowerment to the institution in many cases,
mhm,
or it being, manipulated to justify certain things. So, so when some people, as part of their journey, is the misusing of power. Now,
yep.
that doesn't mean that we accept that, right? That doesn't mean that that should be tolerated. What that means is they're meant to misuse their power so that they walk themselves through why that isn't the proper thing to do to make the
Mm,
choice of how to use their power in more productive ways that benefit the highest good of all. It doesn't
mhm,
mean that it's meant to be accepted. It doesn't mean the society is meant to be like, oh, well, that person has got all kinds of money and all kinds of military might, and so they're just oppressing us. Oh, well, that's just what they're here learning to do, so we're supposed to accept it. No,
mm,
not at all, right? People are, when things are unjust, people are meant to push back, right?
mm,
People are meant to fight back. Because you can't say that you love yourself and allow yourself to be treated like shit. You can't say that you love yourself and allow yourself to be, oppressed and suppressed. And
mhm,
those are, and unfortunately, there's so many teachings that are out there that lead us to believe or give the impression that we're supposed to be okay with suffering, that we're supposed to be okay with having our rights taken away from us. We're supposed to be okay with giving up our agency. We're supposed to be okay with giving up our sovereignty. And that's not the case at
mm,
all, right? Those are many things that, sure, while adversity and is absolutely a part of it, it's meant to be a catalyst to keep you going, not to stay in that same place. And
mhm.
so anyway, so I just want to touch on that because
Yeah.
because that has been so abused over time. And,
Mhm.
that's one of the things that, needs to come to light if we're going to create change in this world.
I agree. And that reminds me of something else I wanted to talk to you about. I have an episode about freedom and how one of the biggest issues I think that we have in the United States is that freedom has come to be equated with the definition of I own it, so I can do what I want. And I can behave how I want, no matter how it impacts others. There seems to be this severe disconnect of like, I own so I can, and there's been a little bit of a loss of care, concern, compassion for the ways that we impact others, not just with what we say and do intentionally, but just with how we are, how we exist. There's this combination of this hyper individuality that just becomes, sort of oppressive, but also just the lack of awareness for oneself and our divine nature, and that we affect other people, we're connected for better or worse. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on kind of that sort of concept of freedom and like how is this happening, and is there anything that we can do to begin to shift this collectively, this whole idea of I own it, so I can. Freedom means I can do and say whatever.
Okay, well, please let me know if my answer isn't going down kind of where you were wanting to take this. So So generally speaking, you described it as freedom. What and kind of the way I describe it is people confuse free will with free reign.
Ooh. Can you say that again just to make sure they hear you?
Yeah, so I think there's a big confusion out there with people where they confuse having free will with having free reign, right? Free will is actually to have about having responsibility and accountability for your life, what you create, how you treat others, and how you treat what's been given to you by the divine. Let's not
Hmm.
confuse, right? Like, and I think that, and compared to free reign, which is I should be able to do whatever I want without consequence. And that's a real problem. And besides the fact that it's a real problem because that can lead people to do things that are not in the highest good of all and that are not beneficial to them. But also what it does is that kind of belief creates a real wedge in people having a relationship with the divine, whether they want to call that the divine, God, creator, source, universe, whatever it might be. Because they say, how can there be something like that and all of these bad things that happen in the world? Well, let's not confuse. This is where the free will and the accountability and the responsibility come from, because the divine can say, look, I can give you a set of Lincoln logs, but it's up to you to decide how you choose to build with them. That's part of this
Hmm.
whole living and learning process. So just because you decide to go beat each other up with these Lincoln logs, don't go blaming me because I gave you the wood. You have the free will to make choices of how you chose to use that wood. So you need to be accountable and responsible for your actions and your decisions and your own learning process. Right. And so that is something that it has absolutely been lost, especially, a lot more in the Western world and a lot of the Western religions. And that also then ties into the patriarchy and also this concept of us being individual beings, because this concept of ownership also goes from parent to child. And as opposed to, parents, looking at their child and saying, this child only exists as me. This is only my DNA, and they are only what I've given them, completely cuts that child off from their divine connection. It cuts that child off from their individuality. It cuts that child off from their higher self. It cuts that child off from their potential, right?
Hmm.
And so now, and then parent, and it gets justified because I own that. That is my kid. This is my property. And so one of the things that I also teach is that the parents choose the children the children choose the parents based on the life lessons that they're wanting to learn, and in many cases it's around love, and that can be love of self, love for others, helping somebody else to understand the divine love. And as a and so many avoidable pains and problems have been caused because of this lost information, this lost context, this lost understanding of what we're here to do and to be. And so now so instead of people being supported in their individual journeys and learnings, what we have people that, are born and their parents try to force them into the life that they want for them. Now you have these self-induced issues because parents are pushing their children into the lives that they want to have for them versus the life that the child had created for itself before incarnating. And now, again, I'm
Hmm.
sure that there's a lot of people that this might be some nails on the chalkboard for, but I don't know what to tell you. I'm kind of tired of watching children get told that they're broken, or if there's something is wrong with them, because humanity has decided to override the divine intelligent design with what they want, and
Hmm.
is causing much pain, avoidable pain and trauma. And it's time for us to get back to truth and healing.
Thank you. I want to say one thing about that and then ask you a follow-up question. A lot of what I talk about on my show too about beginning or continuing healing and restoring the United States in particular, because this is the country I live in. So I'm trying to help where I can. And,
Right.
and so I think, domestic violence is something I'm very passionate about healing and just the home in general, because I think there's a lot in our homes that needs to be healed, and it's caused
Oh
by
yes.
some of what you've talked about with this sort of checkbox nature of, well, I have to go out and do work and do the thing and define myself by those things. And oh, if that didn't really give, if I don't feel how I'm supposed to feel, well, then we get some escapism happening, or, losing ourselves in materialism. Or in the cases of domestic violence, there's just, in the systems we have that don't support victims or people who love the victims, well, now we're just continuing the cycle, especially with the children. And so I have a whole episode, or lots of episodes, about that, because it's something that I'm really, really passionate about healing, is the home. But so I'm glad you went there with parents and children. But the follow-up question was, what is something that parents could do, or even just anybody who has influence in a child's life, what's maybe one or two things that they could start right now, with maybe supporting that child's divine nature rather than the agendas of the caregivers or the collective?
So I think there's two perspective changes I'd love to see.
Hmm.
The first perspective change is recognizing that no matter what you're experiencing, your kid's not broken, the system's broken. Right now, does that mean that the child? So how does that affect, let's say, people that may have what is identified as disabilities or other challenges? Well, remember, this is love through adversity, and so recognizing that we're worthy on our own simply by being these divine beings, and we give ourselves these challenges to overcome and to learn how to love ourselves, as well as we sometimes take on those adversities to help our parents learn that divine love,
Hmm.
right? And so recognizing that your child was born how they're meant to be for what they're meant to be.
Hmm.
And so treating them as such is the first step, right? And then now the second, which then ties into the second step though, which is this is where there's a challenge, because you could say, Graham, I appreciate that and all, but my kid's going to go get beat up in school or have all of this rough life because of this world that we live in. And so I'm just trying to help them. Right. And when we can go into, the whole intentions and meaning well and the harm that does maybe later. But
Hmm.
this is where this is a real struggle, which is how the man-made intelligent design, which is this in general, the status quo, how that is been implemented to try and override the divine intelligent design. And so look, that struggle is very real. And that friction between the two of, hey, this is what my child was born to be, this is what my child was born to learn, this is the experience they're meant to have, compared to this is what the world accepts, this is what the world supports, and this is what the world will quote unquote allow. Look, I think that the next thing comes is, look, helping your child to recognize that just because the systems aren't, especially and mainly these are some of the systems growing up, right? Because you get a lot more individuality and freedom and can kind of lead your own life once you get past the school system. Yes, you've got work and things like that, but as an adult, it's different, right? You don't really have, as a kid, you kind of got to do what the adults are telling you to do, and in certain within the reason, obviously, and
Hmm.
morals and ethics and stuff like that. Is helping your child to recognize the difference between, hey, this is how you are, this is what the world, and this is kind of what the world wants, but and this is how you can fit into it by being you, and helping to support your child through those tough times and reinforcing that strong sense of self, and someone else how else to go about it, but acknowledging that, say, I don't know how I'm going to put this, that these are some of this learning how to be you and letting your light shine is
Hmm.
part of your becoming, even though in the world, and the world does have ugliness to it, the world does have darkness to it. And so by providing that, so I guess that, the self-confidence, the sense of self,
Hmm.
decision-making methodology with a conscience, compassion, empathy, sympathy, both for them, not just for others, but for
Hmm.
themselves too, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
recognizing the importance of equipping your child with the proper tools to navigate
Hmm.
a harsh world, right? Because there
Yeah.
is no getting around the fact that there is there is harshness in this world. So trying to protect them and to avoid it isn't,
Hmm.
doesn't equip the child for success, but teaching
Hmm.
them how to endure it, how to think through it, and not lose their sense of self as they go through it does equip them for success, right? I think those are probably the two perspective changes um, that I think would be some of the most helpful. And there really is no easy, I mean, there is no easy way to navigate a child through a world that isn't designed for them, right?
Hmm.
There isn't. The best you can do is prepare them.
Hmm. I'm really glad you said that. And it caused me to think about just a couple of my parenting experiences where my oldest daughter in particular, all my children are precious to me, but she's precious to me for a few different reasons. She's 14, she'll be 15 soon, and she has this beautiful heart and a much better attitude than I ever had. And by that I mean she loves sports. She has this very strong drive and this really beautiful teamwork kind of approach. Like she's so good at encouraging her teammates, at creating an inclusive environment. I mean, she's the kid who wants to bring brownies for everyone after the game because she just wants to. And, she trained really hard to like level up with volleyball and get on a more competitive team. And a few months into it, she would come to me in tears sometimes because some of the girls on the team were mocking her, mocking her encouragement. And I heard her and I saw her. I witnessed her at games trying to lift people up when they would get frustrated about how it was going and get bad attitudes. But then some cyberbullying started happening where they would screenshot her encouraging messages and post it on, their Snapchat stories with like a side eye emoji and stuff like that, just judging her. And so that did not sit well with me, So there were a couple things that I did. I first kind of from the systemic way of how things were built, double checked, just policies regarding bullying and things like that, and, did all the reporting I could and made it very clear to my daughter that I was angry about it. I didn't hide my anger. And the reason I didn't hide it from her is because I wanted her to know that she is worth protecting and those qualities are worth protecting. I think one of the reasons that we are in the state that we are in is that too often, for whatever reason, compassion and kindness and empathy just get squashed because of whatever insecurities or negative agenda someone else has. And so I let her see my anger. I didn't try to hide it. I let her see how angry I was that that happened because I wanted her to know that she is worth protecting and those qualities are worth protecting. But then, as you were talking about kind of encouraging the divine nature of children, I recognize that these qualities in my daughter are divine, that there is a spiritual power that she has to encourage, to lift up, to connect. And so I made a point to have a conversation with her about that, that just because these people are choosing to judge it and to mock it does not mean that it's not powerful, does not mean that it's not a gift. It means the issue is with them, and this is how you protect these qualities in you and continue to nurture them as you get older. So don't let this situation make you think that you're wrong, or to be compassionate and caring and kind. Learn what you can from these people and how their behavior impacted the team. And you rise higher, you will draw in people who want to build what you want to build. Just don't lose it. And so I couldn't help but think of that, as you were talking. And that's one way that for me at least I was able to do that. And so, if I would give any advice to parents out there, it's absolutely show your kids they're worth protecting and that their divine qualities are worth protecting, and remind them that just because this isn't the pond, that doesn't mean there isn't an ocean somewhere else. So sorry, there's my long answer. I apologize, but
No
you know.
sorries, no apologies.
Yeah. What?
So do you mind if I chime in on that?
Nope, nope, nope. Go ahead.
So one of the other things I heard you say was your is going through a very important time right now where she's learning the valuable skill of discernment.
Hmm.
She's learning and learning about why choosing love is so hard, but also why it's so precious and why it's so valuable. And so she's
Hmm.
learning discernment about who to share it with, when to share it with, who to share her light with,
Hmm.
because it is precious. And the same way that hurt people, healed people heal people. And
Yeah.
so so while she's got to, go through this tough learning lesson, right? Your words of you're worth protecting, your light is worth protecting, your love is worth protecting, and allowing her to um, maintain that so that she can let it shine later on in life, is is going to be what allows her to enjoy more of her life than what she would if she decided to extinguish that light from herself and not share it with others.
Hmm. I appreciate that you included the line of healed people heal people. We don't hear that a lot. We don't. And I think it's really, really important. And that's absolutely what's happening with me and my daughter now is that I've had my own journey over the last few years of rediscovering my own divine nature. And it's been pretty tremendous to see how just living in more alignment with myself has naturally kind of translated to my kids learning to do the same and equipping me to better support them in the ways that you were just talking about with allowing them to be. And I have to tell you really quick before I ask my next question. You did strike a chord in me about being a step parent when you talked about kids and their divine nature versus DNA, because that's something, it can be a really big challenge for a step parent, because you don't share that and they maybe share it with somebody else. But the way that you said supporting their, their divine nature, who they came here to be, was kind of just a boost I needed, that I am meant to be in my stepchildren's lives and to
Yep.
help nurture that. And that's a message out there to anybody else who's maybe in a similar role, that there are bigger things than DNA. And because sometimes as a step parent, you just feel like you do take a back seat, like your influence doesn't matter as much. And I needed to hear that. So I didn't know I needed to hear that, but I knew when you said it, I needed to hear it. So thank you. And I hope all the other step parents or foster parents or anybody who's raising a child that they don't share DNA with to just recognize that there are more powerful connections and divine connections that we're not always taught to be aware of. So thank you.
Love, unconditional love, support, those things have got nothing to do with DNA. Appreciation, lifting people up, those things have got nothing to do with DNA, but those are the things that your children will remember.
Mm, thank you. So, I wanted to also ask, where are you now in terms of like what you're doing, and because I know you have a couple businesses too that support a lot of the things that you're talking about. Are you open to talking about kind of just what your journey is now with your businesses and with kind of sharing some of this collective healing?
For sure, yeah. I mean, those journeys is shoot its own episodes. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm just kind of getting started, and I've had a lot of stops and starts as I've understood my journey and how to support things, et cetera, et cetera. And so, where I've kind of landed and taken the first steps is in health and wellness.
Hmm.
And the reason why I'm starting in health and wellness is because I believe that right now we should be, while AI is a cool tool and all, what we really need to be doing is investing in humans. And
Hmm.
there and part of my work is breaking down this belief that however we're born is how we are, and by starting in health and wellness and helping people understand themselves as a being of consciousness, understand their gifts, understand their abilities, and expanding more and healing more, and showing how people can be happier, healthier, more productive and empowered when they're supported accordingly to what they need, right, is to me the first step in being able to get the resources, that are needed and the focus and the systemic change to treat people as individuals as opposed to this one size fits all box that current medicine tries to fit us into. And if you don't fit
Mm.
inside this box, then you have a disability, a syndrome, etc. And it's like, no, actually the spectrum of what it means to be a quote unquote normal human is a gazillion times wider than what Western medicine recognizes and supports. So anyway, and so our focus is in the Harmony Health Institute is providing individualized care as an individual with an individualized physiology with their own, you know, personal journey to go on. And so in many cases, it's helping people to understand themselves and the healing modalities that we're focused on are both traditional and non-traditional, but we're focused on filling in the blanks as a complement to traditional healthcare where
Mm.
it isn't, right? Because there's already enough out there with biomarkers and other things like that, right?
Mhm.
But what is needed is to help those of us that aren't, whose goals and quality of life are not being met through this one size fits all system and getting them access to the practitioners that will meet that. And whether that is in the form of understanding themselves uh, through human design, understanding the power of sound, of healing through sound with sound healing,
Mm.
the importance of movement and yoga and breath work and traditional Chinese medicine and how our emotions are affecting our organs and affecting our health, et cetera. Right? We were, it's about being able to provide access to to all of those different healing modalities for an integrated approach to understanding self and healing self. So that's kind of what we're focused on there.
Mhm.
And anyway, so that's the Harmony Health Institute, and we're just kind of getting started with that. We're going through a pilot program right now. Sunshine is actually is an important part of that as well.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so anyway, so that's kind of that's kind of where we're starting, and that has certainly been an interesting journey as we get going on that and trying to figure out my positioning and packaging and talking to people. The three groups that we're focused, I should also clarify that while we're absolutely going to help anybody that wants to receive help, we are focused on helping those that are underserved by the current systems. And so our three
Mm.
main groups um, that we're specializing in are women's healthcare, neurodivergent, and spiritually gifted because
Mm.
if we're going to teach people that you have an individualized physiology and how to understand their bodies, we have to connect them with practitioners that are going to honor their lived experience, honor them as having more than the traditional five senses, and they're going to teach them how to recognize that and how to recognize and tap into the body's wisdom and how the body's talking to them, et cetera. In addition to general practitioners, right? Because
Mhm.
traditional medicine is needed too, right? Like, I
Yeah.
joke around, right? I go and I break my arm. I don't want some tea tree oil. I want a cast and and an x-ray to let me know what's going on, right? So it's about understanding, helping people to recognize when to use which healing modality and based on
Mhm.
where they're at, because that's a constant ongoing journey.
That's wonderful. So, is there somewhere that I can direct people if they want to learn more about this too?
Yeah, the harmonyhealthinstitute.com
Okay.
would
Okay.
kind of be right. We're just getting started, so we've got to update a little
Mhm.
bit of some of the content on the website, yeah, but please,
Okay.
that would be the first place you can, check us out, schedule appointments, etc.
Hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. I'll include that link in my show notes if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that kind of naturally led to a quote that I wanted to ask you about that you put in one of your articles, because I loved it too. And it's a question that I've been kind of wrestling with a lot. I know that I am being pulled to build new systems. I don't know what that looks like yet. I know that there's these things I've been called to create and these dreams that I've been having, which I want to ask you about dreams later too. But the quote that you put in your article was by somebody named Buckminster Fuller. Did I say his name right?
I'm not sure.
Maybe.
It
Okay,
could
I'll
be.
read the quote. I'll read the
Yeah,
quote.
I'm curious to
It
see which quote
says,
this is.
yeah, it says, you never change things by fighting the
Mm,
existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
yes.
I love that because that's what I felt pulled towards. And so I was just wondering if you can share more about how that kind of spoke to you, but also how it aligns with what you're doing, and maybe if there's anything that we can all do to to build this new model of more, restoration and healing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean that's at the core of the Harmony Health Institute, and then and our approach to individualized care and individualized support. And our folks at individualized support, after health and wellness, we go into training and education, and then employment and income generation. So,
Mhm.
individualized support is needed in all of these areas because we're not all one size fits all. And to that point, yeah. So, I don't. It's I guess demonstrating how much more, again, happier, healthier, productive, and empowered somebody is when they're properly supported by
Mhm.
the right set of tools, education, and systems, to me is the best way to create change, right?
Mhm.
Because the pushback in today's world is, well, if everybody's a snowflake, how do you actually build systems that support that? How do you create scale? And so as opposed to sharing theory or philosophies, it needs to be demonstrated. And so
Mhm.
that's really at the heart of why we're, doing what we're doing, is to demonstrate that. And then by demonstrating how much better the quality of life is for people when they're properly supported, now that allows me to say, look, these systems are broken, not the people.
Mhm.
And this then goes into my for-profit entity, which is who donates the tools, education systems, all that stuff to the nonprofits, and for them to be able to license that information out once it's been demonstrated to be able to create systemic change, right? Because it's not just enough for me to be able to demonstrate it. I then need to be able to offer others that's access to that same tools, education systems, processes, workflows, et cetera, to be able to create change on a systemic level.
Mhm.
But it's only going to be done when we as people, when we show, that again, that the way they say it, the proof is in the pudding, whatever. And when you take somebody that the system disregarded, and now all of a sudden they're a productive member of society, who can argue with that?
Mhm.
Right? Especially in a capitalist society, what's really valued is somebody's tax dollars, right? And their ability to contribute into the system. So the more that we're able to demonstrate how, like, your approach is what keeps them out of being a contributing member to your system, the easier now way, it allows me to kind of go with the flow to get the support that's needed, to get the dollars that are needed, to get the legislative support, et cetera, to provide that individualized care, to expand the understanding of what it means to the spectrum of what it means to be a normal human, to get the medical community to accept that we have more than five senses, to accept
Mhm.
that we have individual physiologies, and then to go through their, what do you want to call it, testing and framework, et cetera, to figure out how to support that and to create the credibility and all those other things. So it's
Mhm.
definitely, it's a big journey, but, by
Mhm.
no means am I on this alone. There are all kinds of people have incarnated to, assist with this as their own individual expertise that they're, bringing into this game. So.
And sometimes just learning about it can help open you up to next steps for someone, just, as an individual. So, because as you speak, it's giving me ideas, but I think, I couldn't help but remember what you said at the beginning of the discussion where you talked about, as you learned about diagnoses and, checkbox things that just didn't really fit, and went through the discomfort of that growth, kind of at the same time or within the same cycle, you were also learning about your actual nature and,
Mhm.
what this world actually needs. It was all kind of happening at the same time. And so I wanted to make sure to point that out for my listeners, that it's okay to not always know, concrete steps for the whole journey. I mean, I would argue that's the achievement-based culture talking again. I think the most beautiful things are born when you just kind of answer the calling and take that first step of paying attention to the things that aren't aligning, the things that make you feel just like cringe a little bit, but also the things that excite you, the things that make you feel seen, make you feel witnessed. I think just stepping into an awareness of those things is a good first step towards building some of these systems where we do value humanity and the earth and each other. and a more holistic, inclusive approach to healthcare. So for those who are just looking for, well, this is wonderful, I'm going to check out Graham's work, but also what can I do? It's really a lot of it is just beginning by accepting that you might not know all of your steps, but if you're willing to endure some of the discomfort and some of the uncertainty, you're going to create something new, right? Creation is kind of born in the dark, like that's literally how physical creation happens in the womb and things like that. And then there it is. And now it gets to keep growing into this other thing. So those might be some ways for people to just begin. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also this is again one of the problems that we face is that we have such a our culture is totally dominated by the masculine energy, and the masculine energy focuses on the outcome, where the
Hmm.
feminine energy focuses on the journey,
Yeah.
and both are needed, right? But what you're talking about is that we need to lean into our feminine energy and appreciate that we are at where we need to be. And while we might not always understand where everything is building, we need to recognize the value of whatever we're going through and taking the learnings from it along the way. And again, some of these things only will make some sense in hindsight. That's why the feminine energy and the faith to be able to enjoy the journey is so important, because like for me, I went through all kinds of stuff, and while going through it, of course, I'm like, I'm making mistakes. How do I avoid this? This is BS. What is wrong with me? Why am I doing all this wrong? Why can't I seem to get this right? Blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
Well, now we fast forward years later. Now what I recognized was I had to go through everything that I had to go through so that I could have firsthand experience to understand what it meant to live in a system that didn't support me, that didn't acknowledge me, and also to reckon and to also that so that I was able to build bridges for other people using my firsthand experience to say, hey, I've walked in your shoes. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do because you've got your own journey, but I'm able to use my experiences to help you figure out what you should do for yourself. And
Hmm.
so all of the things that I went through were a part of my journey so that I could speak from that firsthand experience, so that I could, help others. But again, I didn't necessarily know that at the time that I was going through
Hmm.
everything, right?
Hmm.
And so that's like a lot of us as well, right? There's a lot of people that have gone through some adversity and through some crappy experiences, so that they have the ability to help others later on in life and to heal people that they wouldn't, had they not gone through what they went through, they wouldn't have had that knowledge to be able to share with others. But again, sometimes it can be 10, 20, 30 years between experience and realizing the value of it. And so again, that's why, having just that faith and the belief and living in the feminine energy of learning how to enjoy the journey and trust in the journey is so important. Otherwise, we will put that guilt, shame, mistakes, etc., on us that is totally unproductive and unnecessary.
You hit some personal chords with me with that one again too, because I'm in the process of completing what I think has been sort of a cocoon phase of my life. I was a teacher for 11 years and, quit abruptly due to moral injury and some corrupt things that were happening that I just couldn't endure anymore. But I've also come to learn that, everything that you just said kind of speaks to I needed to know how that system worked because I entered it with an open heart thinking I'm going to help these teenagers. And I mean I certainly did, but it was like, oh, this is it's very evaluative, it's very oppressive. I kept getting laid off because other people were mismanaging their budgets and it was no fault of my own. I just was at the bottom. So I kept being put in these survivalist situations too, where it's like, hey, I'm good at my job. I kind of like you. It's like I did the thing. I got the degrees I needed. Why do I keep getting laid off? And why am I continuously being put under this microscope and anxious about, this all these evaluations of impossible things to do because teaching is kind of an impossible job. So anyway, I have been in the mindset of trying to understand what my next steps are now that I've spent, a good year and a half kind of in a cocoon reassessing things and it kind of, I was just curious because I haven't heard you speak about dreams, so I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot, but I
No.
felt kind of pulled to ask you this because dreams have, I've, part of what this time has given me, this time of not having a traditional job, is the ability to spend more time with my mind and my spirit. And I can't help but notice that, I mean, I've had vivid dreams my whole life. When I was a kid, they were more nightmares because they just were. But especially over the last year and a half, my dream life has really been ramping up in terms of like things that I'm getting, knowledge that I'm getting access to. But I'm also starting to do things like make up names, meaning like, there will be a name for a figure or even a country in my dream that I did all the research and there's no known record of that name for that person or that place, but it's in my dream. And so I'm just wondering, have you looked into the role of dreams in our lives? And I know like these things that are happening to me in my dreams, like, there's one dream where like I'm absorbing lightning, and there's one where just it's really interesting. So anyway, back to my question. Do you know what what's your take on the purpose of dreams? And this is such a big area of my life that I'm passionate about, which is why I'm getting a little flustered because it's such a big deal to me and it's a very vulnerable thing for me to share, about some of these dreams. And so I'm wondering, because you speak a lot about our consciousness, and I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what your take is on dreams.
Yeah, so I definitely, I will give the caveat that, I do not claim to be a dream expert nor,
Mhm.
um, but, this is what's been given to me to kind of to how to answer your question. I think, one of the things that's, I guess for the context is that what remember everything that we experience is to kind of keep moving us along our journey. And in order to move us along our journey, we have to be able to be given the information in a way that we can understand.
Mm.
So sometimes the information will be literal, sometimes it will be symbolic, and which can mean, and so learning how to understand, first of all, how the information is being given to us. Is it literal? Is it symbolic? And is an important aspect of the self-awareness. And you can, ask. And so what I would encourage people to do is let's start by asking, right? Whoever it is that you speak to, whether you do it through prayer, whether you have a guide that you have, open communication with, whether it's just yourself and your psyche, however it is that it works for you, is ask, is this information literal? Is this symbolic? What is it that I'm supposed to take from this? Is this something that I need to take action on? Is this information being given for me to take action on, or to heal, or to understand? Um, I guess that's probably where I would start, because from there, because then for that'll start to guide you down the path of why this is being given to you. Is this being
Mhm.
given to you because you need to understand a concept? Is it because you need to heal? Is it preparing you for something? And so, dreams also will serve a different function for all of us. I'm trying to think of like an abstract thing where like maybe that where I've been was was given, I guess, and this, I don't know, maybe this isn't a great example, but it's just what popped into my head, right? So I may experience a dream where I'm remembering, where it's just going back in a memory of mine where I didn't know what I was getting into, but somehow I figured it out along the way and I was okay. A few, okay, why was that shown to me? Well, a few days later, all of a sudden I found myself in a situation that I wasn't comfortable with. I wasn't too sure if I should proceed, not proceed. And because I wasn't comfortable with it, I had hesitation and didn't move forward and lean into it. Now, had I, but then the dream pops into my head reminding me that, oh, what happened the last time, and I didn't know something. I leaned into it, I worked through it, everything worked out good. Okay, so now let me do that again. So in that case, it was preparing me for something that was going to happen and reminding me to trust the process. So this is where there a lot of time in reflection and self-awareness is really is a foundational item to understanding our gifts and how the world around us is talking to us, because it's not going to be the same for everybody, and it's not always going to be the same thing every single time for ourselves either. right?
Hmm.
We're given what we're capable of understanding at that moment in time. We just got to figure out how to understand it.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And it helped too, because I think, I still go with the conditioning of, well, this can only serve one purpose. But as you were talking about some dreams being more symbolic, some being more action oriented, some maybe, being more related to clearing. I mean, I can think of all these things and it's very cyclical where it's like there's lots going on. And that's helpful for just approaching each one with you know, sort of a diverse sense of purpose and what it could be for. Because one thing I do wholeheartedly believe is that there's so much that we as humanity are capable of, when it comes to our own divinity and reconnecting with that. And for me, it's shown up in the form of dreams because it's like, okay, this is really beautiful. This is really creative. This is really wild. This is really strange, but it's in here, and it's in here. And so it came from somewhere. And it just tells me, and not just for me, but for everybody, that there's just a lot about ourselves that we need to awaken to, and a lot more that we have to share with ourselves, with each other, and with the world. So thank you for going there with me. Let me just check to make sure I've covered everything that I was hoping to cover. So, this was one thing. Something that I saw a few different times, in your content, and you spoke to it a little bit, but I feel like I should ask you. So, the concept of harmony meets preparation, that might be a good way for us to go kind
Hmm.
of like toward our conclusion. You talk about harmony meeting preparation. It seems to be at the heart of a lot of the work that you do. Can you tell us more about what that means for you and potentially for others?
Oh boy. So this gets into the larger intelligent design of the universe
Hmm.
and everything that exists within the universe, which is in this, because not all universes have the same way of learning. They're not all built the same thing, but they're all meant to for learning. Some are more spiritual based, some are more technology based, anyhow. And so we have people that exist in this universe and specifically in this earth that came from a different universe, that their universe was built out of learning how to chaos and how to navigate chaos and learning how to then have predictability and prediction, which is in conflict with this intelligent design, which is understanding how everything is meant to work in harmony and you're getting information to be able to prepare. So even though we're meant to have to understand adversity, we're also meant to be able to prepare for that. And that's part of where the stewardship comes into play as well, and being able to look out for ourselves. And so if you think about things like astrology, we say, okay, and astrology will predict that, this year represents this and this season and these energies and these cycles, and it's meant to understand this type of and it's meant to foster this type of behavior. Okay, well, we're given that in it, we're being made aware of what's going to be coming to us so that we have the ability to prepare for it. We're not meant to be
Hmm.
caught off guard. And then we're
Yeah.
also then meant to and recognize that we're meant to operate in harmony with our surroundings, in harmony with the learning cycles, in harmony with each other, in harmony with the seasons. Um, and so and this group of people that came from the chaos-based universe, they're also, their consciousness and their way of being and understanding, is part of the driving force behind the man-made intelligent design that's in conflict with Earth's inherent intelligent design. Um, and so I bring that up, I guess, and so especially in the videos, trying to explain to people how these things came to be, where this conflict has arisen from, that it's not necessarily just quote unquote ego based. It's because look, there are different universes. They all have a different purpose, but they all come from the same loving ultimate God or creator of it all. Um, and it's just that, and the problem is arising when one group of people is imposing their ways on others. And that's what we are experiencing. And so, um, yeah, and I guess, and so a lot of it was meant towards trying to explain that, answer some of the questions of
Mhm.
why are we here? What are we meant to do? And how the heck did we get into this jacked up status that we're in?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, because that's a recurring question for a lot of people, I think. And certainly some of your content helped clear that up for me. I mean, I really took kind of this, it felt very childlike, okay, because for me personally, I was raised Christian, and part of my mission, I respect other religions, but I also feel called to point out maybe some flaws where some are becoming more oppressive. And so for me personally, it can be considered controversial, but I do speak out on some of my concerns about Christianity just because I can't ignore that it was the religion of the colonizer. I can't ignore my experience. I can't ignore how it's currently being used to continue to oppress and to justify dehumanization. But I bring that up to say that I've spent several years kind of reprocessing what existence means, you know? And so when I came across some of your content, it was like, oh, yeah, that could be it, that could be it. So it was very healing for me personally. So thank you for going there, in your videos. And obviously I'm just beginning. I certainly don't understand absolutely everything, but it was a seed for me, some of what you put out
Well,
there. So thank you for that.
the concept of colonization is
Mhm.
definitely from that group that's from a different universe that came here and should essentially try to
Mhm.
colonize this planet. The concepts of hierarchical systems come from them and their
Mhm.
consciousness. The concept of technology over spirituality comes from them. The concept of power to the institution versus power to the people comes from them. So that's kind of why I place some of that. That's kind of why I talk a little bit about that. Now, at this point in time, look, everyone's been together for hundreds of thousands of years. And so all types of things are intertwined and intermingled. It's not like these clean, uh, it's like this group versus that group, right? Everything is incestual at this point in time, right? So that's just kind of why I speak to this is the influence from their uh, collective consciousness being
Mhm.
imposed on others.
Mhm.
And to highlight that's the problem. We're doing those things where they came from when it was
Mhm.
built out of a world of chaos where they needed to learn how to create order and predictability. Well, that's where, okay, when you needed to create order and predictability inside of chaos, you
Mhm.
rely on technology, you rely on structure, you rely on those types of things. But that's not what people have come to this universe to learn. And so, there is a lot of conflict and pain caused by that.
Yeah, and just to make sure my listeners understand, so the them is you're the chaos universe, right? Like,
Yeah.
can you explain it just a little bit more to make sure
Yeah.
my
So one, I
listeners
mean, so
understand?
one universe is built around chaos. One universe is built around
Mhm.
harmony. Our this
Mhm.
this universe that we reside in is built around harmony, and then learning and also preparation, where the other universe is chaos and predictability. And so all in each planet then has got it's like learning modules, or I think of a planet as a learning module. You go to each different planet to learn different things. And
Mhm.
so you know, these people happen to come from, they're living in, their universe of chaos, bring it into a universe of harmony, and take what they believe is the way that they're supposed to be living and operating and impose it upon people that aren't meant to live and operate that way.
Mhm.
And then and so with that being done, that's then that way of thinking. It's because that's really the way to do it. Is when I say, it's a way of thinking. It's a belief system, right?
Mhm.
That consciousness produces, and that consciousness and belief system produced the concepts like colonization, hierarchical structures, power to the organization. That were also, and then from there, then the other things were introduced as ways of keeping people in line.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of the cruelty, frankly, then comes
Mhm.
from getting people to submit to that way of thinking and being.
That's really interesting. So is it that some of these consciousness from the chaos universe incarnated into particular human beings, or they're
Oh,
influencing particular human beings in
great
terms of like how
question.
it shows up on Earth?
Yeah, thank you for clear. Yeah, so I don't think I think it's roughly about 500,000 years ago.
Hmm.
The group from another universe, they were, in their own physical bodies from their physical universe, right?
Hmm.
They happened to be in conflict on their planet. There was a war. They essentially, for lack of a better description, destroyed their own planet, and so they were looking for a new home.
Hmm.
And so their physical structures and their physical bodies came into this universe. Then once they got here, essentially there was kind of like, man, think of like man going onto the moon and saying, this is
Hmm.
my planting our flag, this is our new territory.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. And now again, and so that what they when they ran across people that were, loving, harmonious, magic, and they're like, what are you fools talking about? Right? That isn't real because that wasn't their reality. That isn't
Hmm.
where they came from. Right? They focused on technology, not magic. And so then they then said that's not, and so they said, look, that's not real, and we're going to conform you to what our belief systems are. And if you don't conform, then we're going to create these oppressive systems. We're going to create fear, right? And so there's the focus on a fear-based perspective versus a love-based perspective also then was introduced by them. Look, one of the biggest weapons that they introduced to make it into this more masculine energy and into this patriarchal system was frankly sexual violence.
Yeah.
That was one of their most effective weapons that was deployed on the planet. And so this was, and again, they came in a small in a small group, and then through time they just continue to colonize and take over and take over and take over. And because we all came from the same God and creator, there is a lot of overlap in belief systems. Everything is born out of love, but that's then where things get manipulated and where differences come into be. And as opposed to accepting those differences were used to justify um, oppression, justify slaughtering, uh, justify horrible things, frankly. And there are certain aspects of each religion that where you can see the influence of this way of thinking and philosophy.
Hmm.
I pause a little bit as I speak because um, I try to avoid this them versus us thing. It's just we are
Hmm.
where we are right now, and what matters is
Hmm.
recognizing how we got here so that we can unwind it and get to where we need to get to. But we're not going to
Yeah.
get to where we need to get to by running one group of people off the planet. We're going to get to where we need
Hmm.
to get to by cleaning up our own consciousness, by cleaning up our own collective consciousness,
Yeah.
by cleaning up the way that we think, by cleaning up the way that we feel. That's where the solution lies to this.
Hmm. And I can't emphasize enough how much just doing that on an individual level naturally has that sort of ripple effect to the collective. And that's what I really try to teach my listeners is reminding them of just how influential they are. I think because of celebrity culture and because of just, how loud some of the people at the microphones can be, people forget or they're taught that the work that they do internally or in their own homes or just, off camera doesn't have an impact, but it absolutely does. And what you said about clearing out our own consciousness, both, individually, but collectively, that really struck a chord because I fully believe that is where the work needs to begin. And you're right. It's like this is where we are. This is what we have. This is what's around us. So what do we do, individually and collectively? So thank you for
Yeah, I
saying
mean, the
that.
first step is right. If you want to have a clean pool, the first thing you got to stop doing is peeing in the pool, right? You can't just keep adding chlorine and expect it to be a clean pool,
I
right? So
swam in one of those once and it ruined my swimming suit. It was just,
right.
yeah.
And so our thoughts of anger, of hatred is like peeing in the pool, of our collective consciousness. And so the first thing we got to do is get back to our is back to love and grace and acceptance. But that doesn't mean acceptance of crappy things. It means recognizing, hey, this is where this person is at. And so hurt people hurt people. So how do I help this person to unhurt so that they can
Hmm.
heal and get to where they need to be and to become then that more kind, productive member of society?
Hmm.
And and when we do those things, that's how we start to clean up that collective consciousness. And that's how we, can meet people where they are, but we don't have to leave them where they are.
Hmm. Yeah. And I have to just add too, because it came to my mind as you were speaking, so much of that, begins locally and again in our own homes. It's
That's
something I'm
right.
very passionate about. We were talking about children, we're talking about our homes. It's like focusing on healing yourself, but also those around you and witnessing those around you, whether it's your partner, your children, your parents, your neighbors, whoever it is that you kind of feel pulled to really witness. I do believe that's powerful. And so a lot of what you're talking about, I think, begins in our own home, begins with ourselves, begins with our community, and then it's kind of cool to see where it will go next. So,
Yeah, well, to your point, I mean, look, without having, if let's say we're all angry and frustrated, right?
mhm,
Well, so if we keep looking to our neighbor who's also angry and frustrated, how does anything change? What we need are those
mm,
beacons of light. What we need is somebody to show us a different way. Because without that different way, how are we going to figure it out? We need we need better things to model after. And the only way we can do this is if we all just take care of ourselves and focus on being the best version of ourselves, of being happy and healthy and loving and compassionate, then look, now we're providing an example for others to recognize there is another way of being. And we can stop normalizing feeling like crap. We can stop normalizing treating each other shitty
mhm,
because
mhm,
not everybody does that.
mhm. And stop normalizing numbing, because a lot of
Oh,
first steps
yeah.
of this are like just like the way to actually do these things that we're talking about are to maybe unplug from one or two ways that you're just distracting yourself from what you don't want to feel or what you don't want to face and just enduring that discomfort. Because I can tell from direct experience, it's absolutely worth it to unplug from a distraction, which for me in the past was kind of like roster dating and sometimes drinking, like at night, just like I would drink wine and just try not to feel, So
Oh,
for
yeah.
me, it was pivoting from the distractions of just dating, but also numbing through alcohol and instead, focusing on the people who were really witnessing my soul, telling, reminding me who I was, but also just, I replaced wine with dancing. I love to dance. So it's like sometimes this healing just starts with not numbing anymore. And we all know when we're numbing. I mean, you do. Like the people listening, if you think about it, you're like you can instantly go, yeah, I doom scroll or yep, I probably do look forward. This is what Sunshine talked about, like look forward to that beer after work as kind of the end goal of my day. Maybe instead of that beer after work, you pick up a journal, and slowly kind of unplug because that's really how it starts is you stop the numbing for a minute and maybe replace it with something else and be willing to accept that that might come with some anxiety, some discomfort, some pain even. But right alongside it, you're going to start to see your gifts. You're going to start to see your strength. You're going to start to feel your calling again. And so it's absolutely worth it. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about yet that you would like to share about?
No, I just want to reinforce to everybody that you have more gifts, abilities, intelligence than what you've been led to believe. And to treat yourself as kind as you treat others. Right? We give more grace to others than we give to ourselves. We give more acceptance to others than we give to
Mhm,
ourselves. Right? We tend to give others more love than we give to ourselves. Right? So
mhm.
just treat ourselves as well as we treat other people. Right? And and just remember, you didn't come here thinking that you with meaning to have it all figured out. You came here to learn. So
Mhm.
remember that and enjoy the journey.
That's beautiful. I kind of want to just end there. We came here not to figure it all out, but to learn. Yeah.
So
Okay.
enjoy the journey.
Thank you.